Welcome to the Pritzker Military Museum and Library's virtual learning studio in Chicago, Illinois. I'm Kathleen McDonald, Senior Director of Strategy, Programs, and Education. Founded in 2003, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library's mission is to increase the public's understanding of military history, military affairs, and national security by providing a forum for the study and exploration of our military past, present, and future, with a specific focus on the stories, sacrifices, and values. With a national and global reach, these spaces and exhibits aim to share the stories of those who served, helping citizens everywhere appreciate the relationship between the armed forces and the civilians whose freedoms they protect. There's no greater citizen soldiers than the Medal of Honor recipients, the topic of today's webinar. Today's guest speaker is Javier Martinez from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, who will teach us about the history of the Medal of Honor, and two awardees who are also featured in the Museum and Library's Medal of Honor exhibit, World War II veteran, U.S. Marine Chief Warrant Officer 4 Herschel Woody Williams, and Vietnam veteran, U.S. Army Sergeant Alan Lynch from Chicago. The most prestigious of all medals awarded, the Medal of Honor recognizes the military service of members who distinguish themselves with acts of courage in combat, putting their own lives at risk above and beyond the call of duty. Today's presenter, Javier Martinez, is a former Marine Corps officer, having served 10 years in active and reserve forces. He later became a high school social studies teacher, recognized as the 2023 VFW National High School Teacher of the Year. In 2016, he became a national trainer for the Congressional Medal of Honor Society's Character Development Program, which uses the stories of our nation's Medal of Honor recipients to teach youth. He is currently on the education staff of the Army's 1st Division Museum at Cantini Park in Wheaton, Illinois. On behalf of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, it gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Javier Martinez.
Good morning. Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you to the library for inviting us out here to spend some time with your viewers. Welcome to everybody joining us from hopefully across the country. And I was going to say good afternoon, but I realize it might be good morning. So whichever it is, thanks for joining us today. Got a lot to share with you. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into this and try to teach everyone a little bit about the history of this nation's most hallowed symbol, the Medal of Honor. So just some basics. As you probably, most of you know, it is the highest military award the United States gives. It is given for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. That's a lot of fancy words for basically saying this is over and above what was expected of a soldier and showed tremendous courage at the risk of their own life. The medal recommendation must be submitted by peers who actually witnessed the action, and then there has to be other eyewitness accounts. So it is a very rigorous process, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And just some of this may be semantics to some people, but we do not call them winners. They are recipients. This was not a contest. It was not a competition. As you will hear, most recipients, if you have an honor of meeting one, they were just doing their job that day. They didn't go out there to do anything special. They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things. So let's go back in time. Where did this medal come from? So it was signed into law in 1861 by President Lincoln. The Navy felt that they needed some sort of device to basically recognize bravery amongst its sailors and Marines during the Civil War, a lot of it in an effort to create a morale boost. The Army, on the other hand, felt that military decorations of this sort were a European thing. If you kind of do the math, we're only about 78 years beyond the Revolution when the Civil War breaks out. So there's still the stigma of breaking away from our European ancestors. So the Navy Medal is created. An Iowa senator proposes a bill in Congress. It passes, and the president signs it into law. The commanding general of the Army, Winfield Scott, who was one of the biggest resistors of any sort of medals, he will resign. He will leave the Army. And then when he is gone, that stigma kind of goes away as well. And a senator from Massachusetts will propose a bill in Congress for the creation of the Army Medal. And about 7 months later, the president will sign that as well. One of the things I like to point out is kind of a weird dichotomy that a landlocked senator from Iowa proposed a Navy medal, and a coastal senator from Massachusetts is the one proposed an Army medal. The first time the medal will be awarded will be in March 25th of 1863, so slightly less than a year afterwards. And then we will see something in 1917, 16 to 17, that's called the Purge. And I'll talk about that a little bit. Our last branch, the Air Force, is not created until after World War II. So the Air Force, an actual Air Force design, does not come about until after the Korean War, August of 1956. And we'll talk about its first recipient as well. Let's keep moving on. So the Purge I mentioned. When the medal was created, there was no set criteria. The Civil War, this was the only award we had for soldiers and sailors and Marines. So it was very loose as to who could be recommended for the medal. And as a matter of fact, Civil War era soldiers could recommend themselves for the medal. As we get into the Western Indian Wars, after the Battle of Little Bighorn, General Sturgis, who you see pictured there in the black and white photo, he is a little concerned as to how many people from that event have been recommended for the medal. So he starts tightening things up, and we start seeing this idea of above and beyond, doing something beyond what was expected of you. Later on, President McKinley in the late 1890s, he'll order a tightening up even more of the criteria, and we'll see the ability to self-nominate go away. And we'll also see a requirement for eyewitness sworn testimony and not just hearsay as to what the action was. Moving into the 20th century, Congress will now get involved again, and they will authorize a $10 a month pension, which will lead to a six-figure appropriation to pay the recipients a monthly pension. So now they want to make sure that the people who are getting this pension are basically justified. So the Army had a lot of medals from the Civil War, and they convened a board to verify that all of these awards are meeting these new criteria that have been put in place to basically save the dignity of the medal in a sense, make sure we safeguard it. This will lead to what becomes known as the Purge of 1917. Some of the new criteria that comes out of this board is you must be a member of the United States military to receive the Medal of Honor. And the medal has to be given for an act of valor in combat, not just meritorious service. Because of this, there will be a recension or a removal of 911 medals. The lion's share of those come from one regiment from Maine. As an incentive to re-enlist when things weren't going well and their enlistment was up, all 864 members of the regiment were awarded the Medal of Honor. After the war, President Lincoln's funeral guards, his pallbearers, and his honor guard were all awarded the medal. Those were rescinded as well. There were 12 that were deemed to be unqualified. There were 5 civilian scouts because, again, now you have to be a member of the U.S. military. The civilian scouts were not, including Buffalo Bill Cody, a very famous name today and back then, and Dr. Mary Walker, whose photo you see there on the viewer's right of the screen. Dr. Walker was a contract surgeon for the Union Army. Women were not allowed to enlist, but she continued to serve, did some very valorous acts on the battlefield, tending to wounded. She was given a medal in recognition of her service because they couldn't give her an officer's commission, which is what she wanted. Her medal will be rescinded because, again, she was not a member of the U.S. military at the time of the action. So we see a lot of tightening of the criteria. And some other things happened throughout time in the early 20th century till we get to the modern criteria. You can see it here on the screen. I'm not going to read it word for word for you. But basically, this action has to be above and beyond at the risk of the service member's life. It has to be so outstanding that if they didn't do it, no one would think any less of them. They went beyond what they were supposed to do, what their duty actually called for. The recommendations go through an exhaustive review process that, again, requires at least 2 sworn eyewitness statements and all the after-action reports. It goes through the chain of command, typically starting down at the lower unit level, all the way to the service secretary, so the Secretary of the Army or the Navy, the Air Force, then the Secretary of Defense, and finally to the President's desk and to the President for presentation. Anywhere along that timeline, anywhere along that process can be stopped. A decision can be made to award a lower award, a Service Cross or a Silver Star, or award nothing at all, and the process just stops. New laws, the medal recommendation must be put in within 3 years of the action, and the medal itself must be presented within 5 years of the action. But there is a loophole. If Congress feels that it needs to act, Congress can pass a law waiving the time limits for that individual award, and they have done that in the recent past. So that's how the medal is awarded. That's kind of the genesis of the medal. But what is the medal really called? It's called the Medal of Honor. You'll see sometimes and hear people sometimes put the word Congressional in front of it. And as a matter of fact, the photo I have there on the slide, you can see, if you can kind of look close to your screen, this is a citation for a medal that was awarded to a soldier from the 3rd Infantry Division for World War I actions. And it actually says, this is a government document, actually says the Congressional Medal of Honor for Valor. The medal was created by Congress, by a bill in Congress, but it is not a congressional award, it is a purely military award. You will also see the term Congressional Medal of Honor Society. The society was chartered by Congress, a bill that was passed, signed into law by President Eisenhower in the 1950s, and that's why we call it the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. The medal is the Medal of Honor. By the way, the only people who are members of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society are the recipients themselves. No one else can join that club. It's very exclusive. So the medal, what does it look like? Well, you see the 1863 Army medal there on the viewer's left, and you see the Navy medal, pretty much similar to each other, a little bit difference in the designs. But then you see the Grand Army of the Republic badge on the far right, the viewer's far right. Notice the similarities in the ribbon and in the style of the actual 5-pointed star. This was a fraternal organization that came to be after the Civil War. Any Union veterans could join this fraternal organization, and once they joined, they got this badge. So you can see the confusion that might arise by someone wearing the Medal of Honor and someone wearing the Grand Army of the Republic badge. So the Army is going to address this in the late 19th century. They're going to change the ribbon so it doesn't look so much like the Grand Army of the Republic badge. And then after another review board, they will actually change the medal's design. So on the far right of the screen, you see the 1904 medal design for the Army, also known as the Gillespie design. General Gillespie of the Army is actually the one who designed it. And now we see the familiar light blue ribbon with the 13 stars representing the country's founding and the 13 original colonies. And the medal's design has changed quite a bit from the original 1863. There you see the Navy's design from 1863. And in 1913, after the Army changes the ribbon's design, the Navy medal follows suit. And again, we now see the familiar light blue ribbon that we were familiar with today with the 13 white stars. As a little twist, 6 years later, the Navy will have another medal designed, known as the Tiffany Cross Medal, because it is designed by the Tiffany Jewelry Company of New York. The reason being, shipboard life, even in times of non-combat, can be very dangerous. Steam boiler explodes, drowning, sinking of ships. The Navy wanted a way to recognize brave acts that weren't necessarily done during combat. So the Tiffany Cross Medal was designed and put into law as a means of recognizing valorous acts in combat, while the original design would be awarded for non-combat valorous acts. Almost from the very beginning, this caused tremendous confusion, and about 20 years later, the Navy abandoned the Tiffany Cross. Not that many were awarded, and the Navy went back to their original Medal of One design for combat. The Air Force. Air Force, again, does not become a branch of service until 1947. There will be 4 medals awarded to Air Force pilots during the Korean War, but they will receive the Army Medal. Because during World War II, the Army Air Corps, what becomes the Air Force, any pilots who earned the award were given the Army Medal since the Air Force didn't exist. In 1956, the Air Force designs their own medal. It is approved, and the first Air Force design of the medal will be awarded during the Vietnam War in 1965. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So there you have the three current designs. You have the Army, you have the Maritime Services, and you have the Air Force. And I don't have time to get into it, but I will share our website with you here in a moment. There's a lot of symbolism in these medals and the design of the medals, and that's all explained on the Society's website. Some basics. As of today, as of March 21st, 2024, the nation has awarded 3,536 medals to 3,517 recipients, 63 of which are still with us. And you see a large number of them there. They gather every year at their convention. Last year, the convention was held at the World War II Museum. This year we're in, it'll be held in San Antonio. Some of you may be wondering, those of you doing math in your head right now, why more medals than recipients? There are 19 dual recipients. That no longer is a common practice, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. There you see the breakdown there of enlisted to officer. Just a curious footnote. Originally, the Navy medal was not to be awarded to officers, only to sailors and Marines of the enlisted ranks. That will change as the medal progresses through time. Since World War II to the present date, over half of the medals awarded were awarded posthumously, meaning it cost the individual their life to earn the medal. So it kind of gives you an idea of the gravity and the uniqueness of this award. The actions that were conducted to earn the award definitely put the individual's life at risk. So there's the breakdown over time from the beginning Civil War on the viewer's left, going to modern day. As you can see, the Civil War, almost half of the medals awarded were awarded during Civil War era. Because again, we had no other awards to give soldiers and sailors and Marines. And we also had very, very loose criteria. That's tightened up over time. The breakdown for the branches, obviously the Army is our largest branch of service. So they have the largest number of medals that have been awarded. And then at the very bottom of my list there, the unknowns. The unknowns from the World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam were all awarded the Medal of Honor. And that is in recognition of all those sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen who did things that probably would have earned them the medal, but no one was there to tell the tale. No one was left to be able to tell their story. So that common individual soldier who went above and beyond, but no one was there to witness their act. That's why we awarded to the unknowns. And then after World War I, our nation also awarded our Medal of Honor to unknowns from our allied nations after World War I. So that's the number of 9 there. Question comes up. Do you have to be a citizen to receive the Medal of Honor? And the answer is no. You can join our military without being a citizen. Over 700 non-citizens or foreign-born recipients. And again, not all of them decided to go to citizenship. And since I was born in Cuba myself, I'm an immigrant, I always like to point out that we have at least one born in Cuba. This is Captain John Robinson, U.S. Navy, and I don't have a lot of info on him. My assumption is he's born at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the naval base. The recipients of our medal are a cross-section of our country and of our history. They come from all walks of life. There is no blueprint for a Medal of Honor recipient. But as we all know, our country's history is a bit checkered at times. Sometimes people were discriminated against for racial, ethnic, religious, gender reasons. I like to say that our country might mess things up, but I think we do a good job of trying to make it right. And periodically reviews are ordered to make sure that people were not overlooked for their actions because of a discrimination of one type or the other. Great example there on the right is Melvin Morris, soldier from Vietnam. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest award. But after review, they realized, what Melvin did actually warrants the Medal of Honor. And we corrected that. President Obama awarded the medal to Melvin and quite a few others. And we've done the same thing going all the way back to World War I to review these records and make sure our soldiers are rightfully recognized. Most of the information I've shared with you comes directly from our website, CMOHS, Congressional Medal of Honor Society, You can go to this, there's no firewall, there's no special code, and you can click on any one of these blue buttons and it'll take you into a bunch of FAQs and interesting information about the medal and its recipients. Let's talk about some of these recipients, notable ones. The first Medal of Honor action is actually Dr. Bernard Irwin. And his action, as you know, happens in February of 1861, prior to the medal actually becoming a medal. It was presented retroactively. And a curious note here for those of us viewing from Chicago, Dr. Irwin is actually the father-in-law of Colonel Robert McCormick, the gentleman who ran the Chicago Tribune and whose estate today is known as Cantini Park and houses the 1st Infantry Division Museum on the park grounds. Come out and visit us, say hi to me in person. I'm there at least 3 days a week working. The First Army recipient, Jacob Parrott. He's the first of 19 Union soldiers from the Great Locomotive Chase who will be awarded his medal. He's the first one of that group of 19. It's awarded on March 25th, 1863. Today, March 25th, coming up in a few days here, is known as National Medal of Honor Day. Check the Medal of Honor Society's website. You'll see if there's any sort of activities or recognitions going on in your neighborhood or your city, and the public is welcome to join. Corporal Mackey, our first Marine Corps recipient, also from the Civil War. And again, I'm not going to bore you with the reading of what's going on there. Y'all can take a quick look. Navy recipient, we actually don't have a photo of him. We just have the story. And again, this is a Civil War era recipient. And then our Air Force recipient. At the time, Major Bernard Fisher, eventually General Fisher, will land his plane on an airfield that's being attacked to rescue a fellow airman who has crash landed on that airstrip at a Special Forces camp that is being overrun. He will be the first recipient of the Air Force design of the medal. Not the last, though. You might have noticed one Coast Guard recipient on my breakdown, Douglas Monroe. He will be with the Coast Guard at the Battle of Guadalcanal. He will risk his life and lose his life to rescue Marines off the beach at Guadalcanal. The Coast Guard actually has a design that is approved and ready to go. And if there is another Coast Guard man or woman who is awarded the medal, they will receive the Coast Guard design. But to this point, the only recipient of the Coast Guard is Douglas Monroe. I mentioned Dr. Mary Walker. So Dr. Walker is the first and only female recipient of the Medal of Honor. It was awarded at the end of the Civil War for actions like I mentioned earlier, but she was part of the purge. She was not a member of the military at the time. In the late 1970s, there was a review ordered like they do periodically. They looked at Dr. Walker's record and they realized that had she been allowed to join the military, it was not her fault she wasn't able to join. She wanted to. Had she been allowed to join the military and been a commissioned officer, her acts warranted the awarding of the Medal of Honor. Her medal was restored in 1917. Curiously, the medal you see her wearing there, she never turned it back in. She kept it even after the government said she didn't earn it or was not going to be able to keep it. She kept it to her dying days. It's on display in Oswego, New York, where she grew up. Her modern medal is actually at the Pentagon. Father-son recipients, we have two pair. The Roosevelts, Teddy for Spanish-American War, and Teddy Jr. for actions at D-Day on Utah Beach, and then the MacArthurs. The father during the Civil War and Douglas MacArthur for World War II. Our first African-American recipient was from the Civil War, William Carney, and his story is loosely portrayed in the movie Glory. And then this one is really interesting. Our youngest recipient, Willie Johnston, I believe a regiment from Ohio. His actions of running ammunition through the battlefield to his comrades to keep them in the battle occurred on his 12th birthday. So when a 12-year-old tells you I can't do that, bring up Willie Johnston's story. They can do a lot of things kids can. I mentioned the 19 recipients, 19 double recipients. You see Thomas Custer there, which I'm sure irked his brother, George Armstrong Custer. Thomas was awarded 2 Medals of Honor for actions in the Civil War. The Navy has 8 sailors who have been awarded the medal twice. A lot of times the awards were one Army award and a Navy award for the same action, specifically for the Marines, serving with the Army in World War I. That practice pretty much has gone out after World War I, although it is not against the law. We have 9 military chaplains who earned the Medal of Honor for their actions in serving the troops and their bravery on the battlefield. I've got 4 of them pictured here. There are 5 others. So the society, the people who I work for, the recipients themselves. Again, President Eisenhower signs their charter. Congress has passed this bill, and that is why it is called the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, a very exclusive group of 63 members right now. And there at the bottom of my slide, you can see again our website. I really encourage you to go to the website. There is so much more there that I don't have time to share with you. Videos, every single citation for all 3,500 plus recipients. It's all there for you to look at your leisure. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a plug to the Congressional Medal of Honor Society's Character Development Program. You see the 6 core values of the recipients in the medal there. One of the big things the recipients have charged us with doing is to get out to America's classrooms, teach teachers about the medal so they can then take the stories into their classrooms and teach our kids about what it means to live with character. This is all provided at no charge whatsoever to the teacher, to the school district, to anyone. It's all provided at no cost. The training, the resources, and again, there's more information on our website. I know all of you listening either are a teacher, know a teacher, have kids that go to school, or grandkids that go to school. So make sure those teachers know about this. And lastly, the medal in pop culture. Did you know that Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid was supposedly a Medal of Honor recipient from the 442nd Regiment in World War II, and that Rambo was a Medal of Honor recipient? So there's a lot in pop culture of fictitious recipients, but then there's a lot of actual recipients. Audie Murphy, We Were Soldiers, a story by Mel Gibson, Joe Marm, Bruce Crandall, and Ed Too Tall Freeman, actual people who were awarded the medal for their actions. Hollywood most recently put out a movie called Devotion. Thomas Hudner crash lands his plane to try to rescue his flight mate from a burning aircraft in the Korean War. So it is ingrained in our nation's pop culture. I'd encourage you to go out and learn the true stories by coming to our website. And with that, I will quit sharing my screen and I will take any questions you might have.
So feel free to type into the Q&A if you've got a question for us. I'll go ahead and get started. How does the criteria for the Medal of Honor differ from other medals like the Silver Cross or Purple Heart?
So obviously the criteria itself is at a much higher standard. Nothing against the Silver Star or the service crosses, the Distinguished Service Cross, Air Force Cross, Navy Cross, but the criteria to earn those awards is much less than the Medal of Honor. And many times a Medal of Honor will be recommended and it will be downgraded to one of the service crosses. Other medals don't require any sort of eyewitness. For example, the Purple Heart. That's the one everybody says they don't want to get because the only thing you need to do to get it is get wounded. And that's not a fun thing. So the medal itself is above and beyond the criteria of others. The need for an exhaustive review and interviews, the need for several eyewitnesses, which, by the way, in today's modern era, one of the more recent medals, one of the eyewitnesses was a drone. It was drone footage that they used to validate the action.
And how do they acknowledge a group achievement? Do they pick one person or do they hand out a group of the medals?
That's a good question. It is an individual award, so it's not like you're going to say the entire unit did a valorous act and everybody equally performed and got the medal. Now, every recipient will tell you that the medal is not theirs. The medal belongs to everyone because they couldn't have done what they did without the team. But typically, for one particular action, you will not see a large number of medals. Like I mentioned, the Battle of the Ia Drang in 1965, 3 medals did come out of that action. Several Vietnam actions resulted in several medals, but never an entire unit. The Army, the military has other methods, other awards to recognize an entire unit for valorous actions.
And you mentioned in your program, but can you tell us a little more about the most recent Medal of Honor recipient?
So the most recent recipient, a gentleman named Larry Taylor, a helicopter pilot from the Vietnam War with the Army's 1st Infantry Division, who actually landed a Cobra helicopter, which is a gunship. It's not meant to carry passengers, but there was a 4-man reconnaissance team in danger of being overrun. Lieutenant Taylor landed his helicopter, and those 4 members of the recon team actually climbed onto the outside stubby wings that carry the rockets and machine guns on that helicopter, and he flew them to safety that way. Unfortunately, Larry, his medal was upgraded. He did not originally receive the Medal of Honor. Under one of these reviews I mentioned, it was realized that Larry's actions did warrant the Medal of Honor. He was awarded the Medal of Honor sometime last summer, late summer. Unfortunately, he was up in age, and Larry did pass away in January of this year, but at least he got that medal, and his family was able to see the recognition that he rightfully earned before he passed. So Larry's our most recent recipient.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have at this time. So
Okay.
let's resume the presentation.
All right, we're going to go back in. I'm going to share my screen with everyone again. Give me a moment here to get back where I need to be. So some of you may be asking, okay, the library here, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, obviously a connection, but what's the direct connection to the library? Well, Woody Williams, his medal is actually on display here at the library. And there are various interviews on the library's website, their YouTube channel, with Woody. Woody is very prolific. He lived a long, long life, just passed away a couple of years ago. He was our last living recipient from World War II. And he was posthumously awarded the library's Citizen Soldier Award. So Woody has a direct connection to the library. I know he's visited here many times. Another recipient we want to highlight is Alan Lynch. Alan is a hometown boy here. He lives in the Chicagoland area. He has a display here at the library as well, showing his citation, a memoir he wrote, From Zero to Hero, which was published by the library. So there's some direct connections between these 2 gentlemen and this fantastic organization here, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. So we're going to look a little bit at the 2 of their stories. So Woody, as he was called, born 1923, West Virginia, farm kid, grew up on a dairy farm. Great Depression, he joins the CCC. He's out in Montana. World War II breaks out, and Woody wants to join the Marine Corps. Now, this is nothing against my Army, Navy, and Air Force brothers and sisters, but Woody said he wanted to wear dress blues, Marine Corps dress blues, because he thought they were the sharpest uniform. But he was too short. I believe Woody was 5'6". Too short, the Marine Corps said no. By 1943, things have changed. The war's still going on. The Marine Corps realizes, yeah, we'll take short people too. And Woody is allowed to enlist in the Marine Corps in 1943. A few years later, he finds himself on Iwo Jima as a flamethrower operator. And his actions that day on Iwo Jima will earn him the Medal of Honor. He will come home after this and he'll leave the military like a lot of young men and women did after World War II. But Woody will devote his life to service of veterans. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we wrap up. But to me, that's Woody's story. The medal, yes, and he was proud of that, and he should be. But I think if you ask him, his greatest accomplishment was everything he did in the rest of his life till the day he passed away. He was speaking up for veterans and Gold Star families and doing everything. We called him the Energizer Bunny because Woody would do about 200 events a year, even at the ripe age of 90 plus. And he was constantly out there on the go doing what he could. So we're going to show a little short video created here by the folks at Pritzker, which I think tells Woody's story much better than I could.
During the early years of World War II, Woody Williams had the unenviable job of delivering Western Union telegrams to the families of fallen service members. This was his first exposure to the grief borne by these Gold Star families, but certainly not his last. Initially turned away from the Marines due to height requirements, Williams successfully enlisted on his second try at the age of 19 as these restrictions were eased. He was among the Marines that landed on Iwo Jima in February 1945, where 22,000 Japanese service members were waiting to launch their attack on U.S. forces. The Japanese were well prepared with elaborate underground command and control centers, 11 miles of tunnel, and a well-stocked arsenal. The strategic position held by Japanese forces on Mount Suribachi contributed to their initial force dominance. Under intense fire, Williams devised a method of connecting his flamethrower to the narrow openings of Japanese pillbox structures, and he was able to destroy 7 pillboxes in 4 hours. He suffered a leg wound but kept on fighting, earning him a Purple Heart. His determination and valiant devotion to duty earned him the Medal of Honor, one of only 27 awarded to Marines and Navy sailors for service at Iwo Jima. Williams was discharged from the Marines shortly after the end of World War II, yet continued to serve his country for 33 years at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The pain endured by Gold Star families stuck with Woody Williams his entire life as he championed recognition for those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. He founded the Woody Williams Foundation with a mission of honoring, recognizing, and serving Gold Star families by creating permanent memorials to these fallen fighters. Their stories of bravery and service above self are shared widely. This work was truly Woody Williams' passion, and he worked tirelessly to assure that every state had at least one such monument, a place for reflection, remembrance, and education. As we celebrate Woody Williams and our other award recipients this evening, we recognize the critical need to preserve their stories and those of fellow servicemen and servicewomen. Their stories shape our collective human history, and they must never be forgotten. Woody's longevity and his tenacity is best summed up in his own words. I felt that I owed back more than I could ever possibly give, and he surely gave so much to so many. Thank you for your service and for your inspiration, dear friend.
Our other recipient that I'd like to highlight is Alan Lynch. Alan served during the Vietnam War with the Army's 12th Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division. He was born in 1945, south side of Chicago. His family moved to Indiana, where he grew up. And by his own admission, he was bullied as a child in middle school and high school. Graduated high school, 1960s, not sure what to do, wanted to find himself, enlists in the Army. This is when Vietnam War is going on. He enlists. He doesn't get drafted. He volunteers. Becomes a radio man. Very dangerous job. You're always by the commander. You've got a big target on your back and an antenna giving away where you're at. In 1967, at the Battle of Mai An, his unit is called in to assist another unit that's in a firefight. And when they get there, they are ambushed. So now they're trapped in the firefight as well. Alan will leave a position of safety to run across fire-swept open field to help 3 comrades who have been shot. He will get there. He will get them to a position of safety. He will fight off enemy attempts to basically take them or kill them. And then he will 3 times run across that open field again, each time carrying one of his comrades to a position of even more safety. At that point, his unit is going to pull back. He's not back to the unit lines yet. He's still kind of out there on his own. He will refuse to leave his 3 comrades who are wounded because they can't get themselves out of there. And he will stay with them for several hours, waiting for relief from another American Army unit, which will eventually show up. And when they do, Alan has kept his wits about him, and he's actually able to give the counterattacking unit vital information on enemy positions to make that counterattack successful and get them all off that battlefield and surviving. Alan will come home. He will stay in the reserves in the National Guard, I believe. But again, his legacy, I think, is more the idea that his lifelong devotion to service. He came home and continued to serve. He serves to this very day through the Alan Lynch Foundation as an advocate with the VA for service members and their families and for veterans. So again, these 2 gentlemen, citizen soldiers who heard the call, who volunteered, who left their civilian life, and then even after their time in the service, when they went back to civilian citizen life, they continued to serve their country. I think that's what ties them and probably all Medal of Honor recipients together into that one common cause of service before self. So I want to leave you with a short video from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society interview with Alan, and listen to what he says about the medal and the people he serves with.
I got back to my unit. They pulled us all out when we were finally rescued. They pulled us all out of the field. And, you know, the wounded guys went into one tent and got their wounds taken care of, and I got into another tent, got a little white pill, and then I had several liquid refreshments for a couple of days, and then I ended up back with my unit, who was standing down on another LZ, and I came back and they told me they had put me in for the Medal of Honor. Then it got lost. Never heard anything about it before, you know, and the day before I got married, I was notified I was going to get the Medal of Honor. I had a I have a problem with my foot when I drive. It seems to press down on the gas too much. And so I was coming home, and I was followed by a police officer for like the last couple of miles. I turned, he turned. Oh, criminy, I'm gonna, you know, get a ticket. And he pull into my driveway, and he pulls in right behind me. And I get out. Geez, officer, I'm sorry. What did I do? He says, "Is your name Alan Lynch?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Is your social security number this?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Call this number." And I'm like, "What did I do?" And he says, "It's a good thing. Just, I'll see you. Goodbye. Have a nice day. Call that number." So I went into the house. I called the number, and I got some colonel. He says, "Alan Lynch, the same thing." He says, "Well, I have the great honor to tell you that you're going to be receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor from President Nixon on, I think it was Armed Forces Day, 1970. There were 12 of us that received the medal that day by President Nixon. I was so blown away when they put that medal around my neck. And I never realized the impact that it would have on my life. This is a representation of the very best that America has to offer. We are given the tremendous honor and privilege of representing the thousands upon thousands of men and women who have served our country, who did wonderful, marvelous, heroic things and never got recognized. And we carry this for them. It's not me. It's not what I did. It's what they did, and that wasn't recognized. And I think it's a tremendous responsibility. It's a tremendous honor to do this.
So at this point, we are happy to take questions about Woody. Any questions you might have about either one of the recipients. I'm going to go ahead and quit sharing my screen at this time and give it back to Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Javier. And we are honored today to have a special guest join us during our Q&A portion of the program, Medal of Honor recipient, Alan Lynch. So
Hello.
welcome to you. I want to invite our audience to be able to ask questions about anything in the presentation for Javier, and certainly to ask some just direct questions of a Medal of Honor recipient, Alan. So to get started, could you tell us a little bit more about your work with Veteran Services?
I started working with the VA back in 1970, shortly after I got the medal, and I've been involved in veteran affairs ever since. I Veterans Benefits Counselor, then with the VA Hospital as Chief Ambulatory Care at now level FMC. I was 12 years there, and then went to the Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program, then the Illinois Attorney General's Office, and we started the first ever Veterans Advocacy Division within the Attorney General's Office, and retired in 2005. And shortly after my retirement, we started the Alan J. Lynch Medal of Honor Veterans Foundation to help veterans who were kind of falling through the cracks during the War on Terror. And so we've been doing things with them ever since. Now we have started helping veterans organizations that have want to put on events such as women's wellness and suicide. We're working on doing a suicide prevention summit with veterans organizations and different groups. Hopefully we'll get that ready in October, November this year. But our goal is to, you know, help as many veterans as we can through different veterans organizations and programs.
Well, thank you so much for your continued service. Next question is, can you Do you know the folks that you saved? Were you able to get in touch with them afterwards? And what did they think about you winning the medal?
The only one was Joe Esparza, who lives out in California. He lost his arm. He got shot with a bad bullet and ended up losing his right arm. And we got in contact late in the 90s, and then a little bit of contact over the course of a few years. When I wrote the book and got to the battle part, I wanted to make sure that I had it, as close as correct as I could. So I sent him the chapter, and he said, "Thank you for filling in some spots I didn't know." But so we had been, in contact like that. And because of the foundation, I'm on LinkedIn, and I found an Esparza, and I wrote this young lady, and I said, "Your name is very familiar to me. Do you know Joe Esparza?" She said, "Yes, I'm his daughter." And it really hit me that he had kids. I kind of knew it in the back of my mind, this life goes on. We're not always 19, but it just hit me that I just didn't, rescue him. I rescued his progeny, which was really something to deal with. It was very emotional for me.
So we've got another question, very specific from the Rambler ROTC program. Which unit on the ground reinforced D Company 112 Cavalry that served as Mr. Lynch's relief in place? And how did the intel that you handed over occur at that time on the ground?
I don't know who replaced us. We actually we went in to take pressure off of A Company, who had walked into an ambush the day previous and took a lot of casualties. So when we came in, it was to relieve pressure. We didn't know that A Company was actually bait. So my platoon, we were walking, I see she's ROTC, so she'll probably understand platoons in column. If not, check it out. But 4th Platoon was on our left flank. We were on the right flank with 2 platoons behind us. So it was a whole company maneuver going in. My Lieutenant Roy Sutherland, was in country, had been in the rear with the gear as a staff officer. He got his first combat command on this air assault. So I was his RTO. We were attached by, I carried the radio, which is a lot bigger than they carry now. And so when we came under fire, he immediately ran forward. I went with him because I was his shadow. So we radioed in what was going on. After I earned the medal, I didn't know it, but he had been on a rescue mission to get to us, was killed trying to do that. Got the Distinguished Service Cross for it, which I always felt kind of guilty about. But I don't know. I came out of that ambush, and once I got the guys back to the rear, I told them a bunch of stuff of where things were, and everything after that is kind of just a blur, because it was a relief of getting back. So I don't know what I told them. I don't know how I told them. Somebody evidently wrote it up. But I was just basically telling my unit, D Company, where we were and what was going on. We didn't, as far as I know, we didn't get relief. And I read the after action reports, and I read my battalion commander, my company commander's log, and D Company was there. We weren't relieved by anybody, from what I understand.
How does the medal change your life as a recipient?
I didn't think it would, actually. Initially, there were about 500 recipients, and I came home after getting the medal. I went right back to work for Libby McNeil and Libby, working in shipping and loading boxcars and trucks and stuff like that. And one day I got a call from the VA, and they said, "You can come to work as a veterans benefits counselor." I thought, hot factory, air-conditioned office, what to do. So I became a veterans benefits counselor and ended up working at the Great Lakes Naval Base, working with Vietnam returnees. I did that for about a little over a year, working with Richard E. Bush, a Medal of Honor recipient who earned his medal at Guadalcanal. And so we worked together for a little over a year, and then I went to the VA hospital at North Chicago. They used to call it Downey, and I worked there and became chief ambulatory care. And during this period, there was not a lot, with the medal other than going to conventions. But as recipients started to pass away and we became less and less, my activities got more and more. And now I'm really, really busy. And it's changed my life because I didn't realize just exactly how much this medal meant to not only my fellow service members and veterans, but also to the general public at large. So it's made me live my best life. I always, one of the World War II recipients said, earning the medal is the easy part, wearing it is the hard part. And I found that to be exactly true.
Great. Next question. Can you discuss the concept of disciplined initiative on the battlefield at the time? Our program studies it as the part of the mission command philosophy. Much of the actions discussed in this webinar are empowered junior leaders executing within intent. How can we empower our subordinates to do the same?
Well, that's a great question. Let me tell you about Captain Orsini. Captain Orsini was my company commander. He led the relief mission to try to rescue us the first time. Lieutenant Sutherland, who had been brand new in field, who in fact argued to get out to the field on this air assault. He wanted to get his time in combat. He'd been a staff officer. He wanted to get out. I knew Lieutenant Sutherland for all of about 3 or 4 hours before he was killed trying to rescue us. Lieutenant Orsini, Captain Orsini led by example, as did Lieutenant Sutherland. It comes down to never ask your people to do something that you're unwilling to do. And Captain Orsini was one of these officers who, if we were humping the field with full field packs, he humped with full field packs. We had one officer that we would carry our full packs, and he would have a logbird come in and take his pack out so we didn't have to carry anything. The one officer who I won't name because he retired as a general officer, led by command. Captain Orsini led by example. People will follow officers that lead by example. They don't follow so much officers that lead by command. And there's a big difference between that. Now, that's not to say Captain Orsini wasn't a commander, and I've served with some great officers. Major General Mukoyama, a very good friend of many, many years, was a major battalion commander. If we were in the field, he was in the field. If we were wet, he was wet. So it's all lead by example. I think that would be the absolute key to everything.
That's great instruction for anyone in or out of the military for management. Javier, can you tell us what medal was used for the Medal of Honor and who actually manufactured the medal and designed it?
So the medal itself, the composition of the medal, I am not 100% sure it's an alloy. It's not gold, even though that's the color of it. The government gives out very specific contracts for the creation, actual die casting of the medal. It is all very, very controlled. The dies that are used to punch the medals are serialized and kept under lock and key. And if a company loses the contract, they have to turn those dies back in. The ribbons are cut to specification. And then the different branches, what they call their heraldry, I can never pronounce that word, they're the ones who actually put everything together. And again, just a weird circumstance of the government. The Army medals are actually put together, the ribbons, the medal themselves, the hangers are put together at the Naval Yard in Philadelphia. Army medals. I'm not sure where the Navy ones are done, but they're not done at the Naval Yard. And it's a very, very tightly controlled process of, and the contracts stay with one company as long as they meet the specifications. Because again, we don't want a dozen different companies because we want the same medal every time. You cannot get one just anywhere. It's against the law.
Another question for Alan. Being part of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, what has your experience been meeting other Medal of Honor recipients?
It's always pretty humbling. It's kind of funny. When I was a kid, I read a lot of history, and I love, I'm kind of eclectic. I read all kinds of stuff, but World War II, when I was a kid, was really my passion. And I would read these stories of like Audie Murphy and, these different guys and that did this tremendous actions. And then I would meet when I got the medal and I would actually meet them, I would go, oh my gosh, I read about you. And it was kind of funny that the humanity, because as a kid, I had this big picture of how, these superheroes, like Superman, and they're all at least 6 feet tall and, chiseled and, muscular. And then you meet these guys like Nick Oresco, who was just the greatest guy I ever want to meet. He was just a little short guy. And as I recall, he was a little bit henpecked, as was the term back in my day. And, you look at him and you go, this guy wiped out like 3 or 4 German machine gun nests. And he's like, he looks like Walter Mitty when his wife was telling him what to do. You go, dude, you wiped out these machine gun nests. Dick Bush was a guy I worked with, and he had a bad hand as a result of jumping on a hand. It was one of the few guys that survived jumping on a hand grenade. And I said, well, how did you survive that? He said, well, I took a sandbag and my helmet, and I put that on top. It blew me up pretty good and lost my hands a little bit, but just a real guy. It's the pressure of that moment that made the Medal of Honor recipients special. They all have, backstories and then stories afterwards, and that period of time where they earned the medal is what made them special. It's humbling to see some of these people that have problems just like everybody else, myself included. And for that one bright and shining moment, they did something extraordinary.
Well, that's about all the time we have today. On behalf of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library and our guest speaker, Javier Martinez from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society and Medal of Honor recipient Alan Lynch, I would like to thank you for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and this concludes our program.